Obviously, lots of challenges, not just for the airlines. A lot of other businesses are operating in a fairly challenging environment right now. You've talked about, and just to focus on the silver lining here, you've talked about opportunities domestically as well. Are you talking about building market share there?
Yes, we are, and actually I think we're generally optimistic, because what we're seeing in the domestic market is some sectors like the resource sectors going through a boom again. We're adding 13% capacity into Western Australia because of that. We are seeing weakness in other corporate sectors like telecommunications, financial services. We're seeing growth in the SME market. We're seeing growth in the premium leisure market, but we are on the price-sensitive leisure market seeing some weakness. But the great thing that we have is the ability to match supply capacity to demand, and what we're seeing is a very benign capacity environment with negative capacity growth internationally and very flat to slightly negative domestically forecast for the next 6 months.
Yeah, the outlook has been, I guess, quite mixed, though, for Qantas, Alan. You talk about people saying recession's imminent here. At least the economic headwinds are growing stronger. Has that dented air travel demand in any way? What gives you confidence that you can ride this out?
So we've had, in these results, we've had a record revenue performance, $18 billion. And I think everything in our business really comes down to supply demand. If demand is weak in certain sectors, we have mobile assets. We can reduce capacity, move the assets to other places where they're performing well. We can always retire aircraft earlier if need be. We can defer arrivals of aircraft if need be. And we've done that in the past. And Qantas is a lot more agile and flexible company. We've made a lot of changes over the last 5 years. And of course, we have a business that most airlines don't, called Qantas Loyalty, which actually has very stable earnings. It grew, it was back to double-digit growth in the second half of the year. It's the second highest performing business in the group. It's got targeted growth between 7 and 10% each year to 2022, and it's performing exceptionally well. So we've got a lot of positives within the Qantas group.
Alan, it's Tom here in Beijing. You say that you've seen demand for flights to Hong Kong drop about 10%. Does that continue, do you think? Do you expect to see further weakness in demand for flights to Hong Kong, and how long does that continue?
Yeah, we're thinking that this will continue for the next few months at least. So we have the flexibility again of moving to slightly smaller aircraft. They're A330-300s at the moment. They go to 200s. Essentially the same aircraft, same product, but with less seats. And we're going to do that over the next few months to take 7% of capacity out, in anticipation that this will continue for a few months. What we've seen in similar situations around the world is that when the issue resolves itself, there's usually a rapid rebound. So we'll maintain that flexibility, move the aircraft to other markets like Manila and Singapore that are actually going quite strong, and take advantage of the demand there. So I think it's a good way of managing this issue.
Alan, look, you're obviously aware of the controversy around Cathay and the former CEO, Rupert Hogg, having to step down and many people view it as pressure from Beijing. Given the importance of the Chinese market to Qantas, would you, if pressured by Beijing, would you consider firing members of your own staff if they did launch or were involved in anti-China protests? Are you concerned about that kind of pressure?
No, I think, first of all, I know Rupert Hogg very well. I think he's a very good guy, and I wish him all the best with what happens going forward. I think in relation to this, every company has its own code of conduct, has its own belief and view of people operating to the laws in each of the individual countries. And, I won't go into hypotheticals on what could happen. The reality for us is that we have a big operation to Hong Kong. We have a big operation into Shanghai and China, and a good relationship with China Eastern, and it's a very important trading partner for Australia, and I think nothing has changed in relation to that.
But we have seen, though, not just protests in Hong Kong, Alan. We've seen it in cities in Australia and also other places in show of support to what's happening in Hong Kong. Do you have a policy if some of your staff do join those protests? We basically just want to understand how you would approach the issue. Would you approach it the same way that Cathay did?
So we have, as I said, a code of conduct which determines what people can and can't do. We have that's very clear out there, and there's a range of spectrums that people can get involved in. Some of that would be within the code of conduct, some of it may not be. It'll depend on the individual cases, so it's very hard to answer it, and I don't know the details of the Cathay cases, what people were involved in, what people why determinations in some cases took place. So it would depend on a case-by-case situation.
Sure, perfectly understandable then. Given, of course, your presence, though, in Hong Kong, you do have permanent staff, I understand, in Hong Kong. Do you have a contingency plan for those staff in case things do get violent and out of hand? And obviously, no one hopes that will happen, but do you have a plan B?
So we are obviously very important to us is the safety and security of our people, and we have, in terms of our flight attendants and pilots, moved them closer to the airport to avoid any of the disruptions that may delay them getting in and out of the airport. And we're very much with our people looking after their security and health up there and making sure that we put the appropriate mechanisms in place to manage that. And that's the same. That's no different from events that have occurred around the globe. You know, we've had, as you're aware, there were bombings in Bali. There were issues that took place in Thailand. We had issues that took place in India. There have been issues that have occurred over a large number of years, and airlines have gotten, I think, pretty good at putting the appropriate systems and processes in place to make sure that the staff have the full attention and protection of the airlines.
Yeah, Alan, just want to switch gears now. It's been 30 years since that secret 747 flight from London to Sydney went nonstop. I got to ask you about Project Sunrise here. You're talking about some research flights you're going to be conducting. What do you want to get out of them? How far away are you from launching?
Yes, so we're going to do 3 research flights by the end of this year, 1 October, 1 November, 1 December. It will be the first time a commercial airline has flown from New York direct to Sydney, and we'll do 2 of those flights. It'll be around 19 hours. And it'll be only the second time that somebody's flown, an airline's flown from London to Sydney. The first time was 30 years ago this week with the delivery of the 747-400. What we're hoping to get out of those flights is a lot more research. We have the University of Sydney, Monash University looking at the health and well-being, monitoring the alertness and the fatigue risks issues for our pilots on those flights. And we think that will help inform us for the full Sunrise flights that will take place hopefully in 2022. We'll also have our regulator, CASA, looking at those policies and making sure that they're okay with an airline flying over 20 hours.
And I have to ask you then of aircraft preference, a couple of things. I mean, is it possible that the 7879 might just be the aircraft, or is that just for testing? And as a follow-up to that as well, we know, of course, some of the delays at Boeing. Would you be prepared to push back the timing for Project Sunrise in the event, of course, that is the right airline that you eventually choose, to simply accommodate the right aircraft? In other words, is it the right aircraft over timing?
So, yeah, great questions. First of all, the 787-9 is not the right aircraft because these flights will have a maximum of 40 people on them. It just doesn't have the range. That's why we've been in a tender process with both Airbus and Boeing. The 350 and the 777-8X are capable of doing this with commercial loads that make the business case work. So we're doing this as a trial with 40 passengers. We can't continually do that. And we have had a compelling offer put on the table from Boeing. They absolutely makes this a 2-horse race. While they'll have potentially a delay with the 777-8X. They have put a transition proposal on the table that looks very attractive, and we're analysing that and going through it. So this is still a very competitive race between both manufacturers.
Alan, can you give us an update on your joint venture plans with American Airlines?
Yes, so we had recently got approval from the Department of Transport in the US, which is fantastic, and we're gearing into that now. So I think from this week onwards, our code appears on a large number of American Airlines flights in domestic US and on their flight from LA to Sydney and into New Zealand. Similarly, their code appears on our flights, which will give a lot more choice to customers. And from next year, very excitingly, we start Brisbane to Chicago, a big American Airlines hub. We wouldn't have been able to do that without the partnership with American, and we start new services from Brisbane to San Francisco. And American, I think, are looking at new flights from the US into Australia. It's all really positive for customers, and it'll be a very big positive for our international business, for the economics of those US routes.